The first rays of sunlight bathed the Beam family's farm in a golden glow, warming even the coldest of hearts. It was an ordinary day in Burleson, Texas, where life followed a simple but deeply meaningful rhythm. Christy Beam stood by the kitchen window, watching her 3 daughters playing in the yard. The laughter of Annabelle, the middle child, rang out like music. At just 9 years old, she had an infectious energy and a smile that seemed to radiate pure joy straight from the heavens. Kevin Beam, the father, walked into the kitchen carrying tools, his face calm with the contentment of a man whose life revolved around his family. He planted a quick kiss on Christy's forehead before reaching for his coffee mug. "Looks like Annabelle's planning to lead a revolution over that cake," Kevin joked, glancing at the girl, who was now trying to rally her sisters for an imaginary cooking contest. Christy smiled, but her gaze lingered on Annabelle for a few seconds longer than usual. Lately, something seemed different about her. A subtle but persistent fatigue had begun to show. It was enough to stir a mother's heart with unease. That Sunday unfolded like so many others, with the family gathered at the local church. The sermon was about trusting God through both good times and bad. Annabelle loved singing in the children's choir, her angelic voice drawing attention. "That girl is a blessing," said Mrs. Davis, a longtime family friend who had known Annabelle since the day she was born. For the Beams, the church was the cornerstone of their lives, a place where dreams were nurtured and worries laid at God's feet. But that day, after the service, Annabelle complained of a mild stomachache. Christy and Kevin, ever vigilant, decided to keep an eye on her. In the days that followed, Annabelle began showing more signs of fatigue. She no longer ran as much in the yard, and her stomach pain grew more frequent. Kevin thought it might be something minor, perhaps a passing virus. "Let's take her to the doctor, just to be safe," Christy suggested, folding one of Annabelle's shirts. "Of course, but I'm sure it's nothing serious," Kevin replied with his trademark optimism. Still, Christy's heart clung to a worry she couldn't quite explain. The stillness of the night seemed to echo with a sacred silence, a quiet foreshadowing that the family's journey was about to change forever. The doctor's office was small and practical, but in that moment, it felt overwhelmingly suffocating to Christy and Kevin. Annabelle sat between them, swinging her legs absent-mindedly, while her mother clenched her hands tightly. Dr. Thompson walked in with a serious expression. There was something in his tone that made Christy hold her breath. "Mr. and Mrs. Beam, the test results revealed something concerning. Annabelle has a rare intestinal disorder called chronic intestinal pseudo-obstruction." Christy stared at the doctor, waiting for him to say something more, something that would offer a quick solution. But his somber look only confirmed the gravity of the situation. "It's a condition that affects the intestine's ability to function properly. There's no known cure, but we'll work together to manage the symptoms." The words "no cure" echoed like a church bell, reverberating through Christy's mind. Kevin placed a hand on his wife's shoulder, trying to offer support, but he himself looked ready to crumble. In the days that followed, the Beam family's life changed completely. Medical appointments became frequent, and little Annabelle, once so full of life, seemed to lose her spark. She stopped playing in the yard, preferring instead to stay inside reading or drawing. Christy spent sleepless nights researching the condition. She wanted to understand every detail, clinging to the hope of finding something, anything, that could save her daughter. "God has a purpose, Christy. We have to trust him," Kevin said, finding her buried in papers and medical articles. "I know, Kevin, but how do you trust when you see your child suffering and there's nothing you can do?" she replied, her voice trembling. At church, the family continued attending services, but now an invisible weight seemed to hang over them. Mrs. Davis and other members tried to offer support with prayers and words of encouragement, but to Christy, their words felt hollow. One night, as she tucked Annabelle into bed, Christy finally let her guard down. "Do you believe God will heal you, sweetheart?" With childlike innocence, Annabelle smiled. "Of course, Mommy. He's God. He can do anything." Her daughter's unwavering faith hit Christy like a wave. She kissed Annabelle's forehead and stayed in the room for a long time, watching her drift off to sleep. Later, Christy sat on the front porch, gazing at the star-filled sky. She tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. "Lord, where are you? Why is this happening to my daughter?" The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it a silence that felt like a reminder that even in the darkness, God was there. Mornings at the Beam household were no longer filled with laughter and playful chaos. Instead, the dominant sounds were alarms and reminders, pills to take, appointments to keep, and Annabelle's schedule managed as though every minute mattered. Christy was exhausted. Her nights were consumed by prayers that seemed unanswered and a growing restlessness in her heart. Kevin did his best to ease the burden, but mounting medical bills forced him to work longer hours to support the family. Annabelle, once the radiant light of their home, was visibly weaker. Some days, she stayed in bed all day, unable to eat or even sit up. Yet, her faith remained unshaken. "Mama, God sees me, doesn't he?" she asked one morning, her voice faint as her eyes struggled to stay open. Christy swallowed the lump in her throat and held her daughter's small hand. "Of course, my love. He's with you all the time." But inside, she felt like a liar. While Kevin tried to manage the finances, Christy was fighting a different battle, her faith. The woman who once prayed with confidence now felt as though her words hit a wall of divine silence. "I don't know how to keep going, Kevin. It all feels like it's falling apart," she admitted one night after the kids were asleep. Kevin sighed, running his hand over his face. "We keep going because we have to, Christy. She's our daughter." Christy knew he was right, but the lack of answers weighed on her in ways she could barely bear. Despite her doubts, the church continued to be a source of support. The pastor visited regularly, offering prayers and comforting words. Church members organized fundraisers to help with medical expenses, providing moments of temporary relief. One night, during a small prayer group, Mrs. Davis held Christy's hand and looked into her eyes with deep empathy. "God doesn't abandon his own, dear. Even when we can't feel him, he's working." Those words stayed with Christy but weren't enough to erase her doubts. The lowest point came when Annabelle had to be hospitalized after a severe bout of pain. The hospital room was filled with machines monitoring her every heartbeat and breath. Christy sat beside the bed, holding her daughter's hand, while Kevin made calls to doctors and insurance companies, trying desperately to keep things afloat. Alone with Annabelle, Christy finally let her guard down. "I don't know what to do anymore, Annabelle. I'm trying to be strong for you, but it feels like God isn't listening." Annabelle, frail but resolute, opened her eyes and offered a weak smile. "Mama, he's listening. You just have to wait." Back home, as the family attempted to re-establish some sense of routine, Christy knelt beside Annabelle's bed. For the first time in months, she prayed with raw honesty. "God, if you're there, please show me. I need to believe there's a purpose in all of this." The silence of the night enveloped the house. But this time, amidst the darkness, Christy felt the faintest spark of hope. The scorching Texas summer mirrored the weight the Beam family carried. Christy, with dark circles under her eyes and an exhausted expression, was on the phone, trying to schedule an appointment with a specialist in Boston, one of the few doctors offering a different approach to Annabelle's condition. "I'm trying to save my daughter, not asking for a favor," she snapped at the hospital representative, who kept emphasizing the exorbitant costs before even confirming the appointment. Kevin entered the room and watched his wife. She was wearing herself down, and the strain was beginning to affect everyone around her. The growing tension was starting to crack the foundation of Christy and Kevin's relationship. He believed they needed to trust more in God's providence, while she felt abandoned by both God and science. "I don't understand how you can keep talking about faith when we're losing our daughter right in front of our eyes," she exclaimed during a heated argument. "And I don't understand how you can keep fighting alone when we know we don't have the strength to do this without God," Kevin replied, trying to mask the tears welling in his eyes. Annabelle, hearing the argument from her room, clutched her Bible to her chest. Though too weak to speak, she prayed silently, asking God to unite her parents and lighten the burdens they carried. The search for answers turned into a relentless series of trips. Christy spent hours in airports and doctors' offices, only to hear the same disheartening phrase, "There is no cure." With every repetition, her frustration deepened. During one of these trips, she found herself alone in a hotel room. Staring at the starry sky through the window, she whispered, "Are you really there, God? Because if you are, I can't feel it. I can't keep going like this." The absence of answers felt like her new reality. The silence from heaven hurt more than any diagnosis. Despite the constant pain and weakness, Annabelle continued to exhibit a faith that baffled her mother. "Do you ever get angry at God, Annabelle?" Christy asked one day, holding her daughter's hand during yet another hospital stay. Annabelle looked at her with a gentle smile and said, "No, Mommy. I know He's taking care of me." Her daughter's words were like a ray of light cutting through the storm, but even so, Christy felt her own faith slipping further away. One of the rare afternoons when Annabelle felt well enough to play outside, she insisted on climbing the giant tree behind their house, a special place where she often talked to God. "Mommy, I just want to be closer to the sky," she said with a smile that broke Christy's heart. Kevin helped her climb, staying close to ensure her safety. Suddenly, a branch gave way, and Annabelle fell from a considerable height. The sound was like thunder. Christy and Kevin ran to the spot in sheer panic. Annabelle's small body lay motionless on the ground. Christy dropped to her knees beside her daughter, cradling her in her arms and screaming for help. "God, please. Don't take her from me." The wind rustled gently through the trees, as if offering a whispered response, but Christy couldn't hear it. All she knew was that she had reached the very bottom, where all that remained was silence and, perhaps, a glimmer of hidden hope. The silence following Annabelle's fall was piercing. Kevin and Christy knelt beside their daughter, tears streaming down their faces as they tried to assess her. Christy cradled Annabelle in her arms, pleading desperately. "Annabelle, please wake up," she whispered, her voice breaking with despair. Suddenly, Annabelle coughed. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at her parents with a calm, yet confused, expression. "Mama. I saw Jesus." The ambulance arrived minutes later. The paramedics assessed Annabelle and, astonishingly, found no serious injuries, only a few superficial scratches. "It's a miracle she fell from that height without any fractures or internal injuries," one of the paramedics said, shaking his head in disbelief. Still in shock, Christy clung tightly to Annabelle's hand as they were taken to the hospital for further tests. During the ride to the hospital, Annabelle spoke with a clarity that stunned her parents. "I was in heaven, Mama. It was so beautiful, full of light and peace. Jesus was there. He told me it wasn't my time, that I still have things to do here. Christy and Kevin exchanged glances, unsure how to respond. Annabelle's voice carried no doubt, no fear, only certainty. He said you need to trust more, Mama. He's taking care of me, even when you can't see it. Her words hung in the air, undeniable and profound. Kevin, visibly moved, put his arm around Christy, trying to comfort her. But Christy was frozen, processing every word her daughter had said. At the hospital, a series of tests were conducted. The doctors, expecting internal injuries given the severity of the fall, were astounded by the results. Annabelle was completely unharmed. It doesn't make sense. From that height, she should have at least one fracture, the attending physician said, staring at the x-rays in disbelief. While Kevin thanked the medical staff, Christy sat by Annabelle's bedside. Annabelle, how did you know it was Jesus? She asked hesitantly. Because he knew my name, Mama. And because when he hugged me, I felt completely safe. Despite everything, Christy struggled with her disbelief. Logic told her it was impossible, that maybe it was just her daughter's imagination or the result of trauma. Yet, she couldn't ignore the fact that Annabelle was perfectly fine, as though nothing had happened. That night, Christy knelt by Annabelle's bed, watching her sleep peacefully. Lord, if this was a miracle, show me. Help me to believe again. Outside, the wind rustled the branches of the tree where Annabelle had fallen, as if nature itself bore witness to something far greater than human understanding. The next morning brought a reverent calm to the Beam household. Annabelle was radiant, as though the fall had erased months of suffering. She sat at the breakfast table, laughing with her sisters and eating more than usual, a sight that Christy couldn't help but observe closely. Are you feeling all right, sweetheart? Christy asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. I feel amazing, Mama. Better than ever. Christy and Kevin exchanged a glance. It was as if the vibrant, energetic Annabelle they'd lost to illness had suddenly returned. As Kevin left for work, Annabelle tugged on Christy's hand, pulling her into the living room. Mama, can I tell you more about what I saw? Christy hesitated for a moment, but her curiosity won out. Of course, sweetheart. I'm listening. Annabelle began recounting her experience after the fall. Everything was so bright, but it didn't hurt my eyes. I was in a field full of flowers, and the grass looked like it was made of light. Then Jesus came. He hugged me, Mama, and told me everything was going to be okay. A chill ran down Christy's spine. He said I was going to be healed, but my mission wasn't over yet. And, Mama, I saw Grandma. Christy gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Her mother had passed away years ago, long before Annabelle was born. How do you know it was her, sweetie? Christy asked, trying to stay calm. Because she told me. And she shared stories about you when you were little. Christy could barely process what she was hearing. The details, the calm certainty in Annabelle's voice, everything pointed to something far beyond a child's imagination. That evening, Kevin returned home to find Christy deep in thought. Annabelle told me more about what happened in heaven, she said bluntly. Kevin stopped and looked at her intently. And do you believe her? Christy took a deep breath before answering. I don't know, Kevin. But I can't ignore what she said. As they spoke, Annabelle walked into the room, holding her Bible open. Can we read together tonight? I want to show you the psalm Jesus mentioned." Christy and Kevin sat in stunned silence. They knew Annabelle wasn't making this up. Her faith had grown even stronger, and she radiated a peace that seemed to fill the entire house. In the following days, Annabelle's health began to improve dramatically. She no longer felt any pain, and her energy had completely returned. The family decided to schedule another round of medical tests to confirm what seemed impossible. The doctor, who had once called her condition incurable, studied the new results with a mix of disbelief and awe. "There are no signs of the disease. It's as if it never existed." Christy's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in months, she felt something she couldn't explain, the undeniable certainty that God had touched her daughter. Back at church, the Beam family sat in the front row. The pastor, aware of Annabelle's journey, asked the congregation to join in a special prayer of thanks for the miracle in her life. Christy, holding her daughter's hand, closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Lord. Thank you for not abandoning us, even when I struggled to believe." In that moment, a new light seemed to ignite within her, a light as strong as her daughter's unshakable faith. The news of Annabelle's recovery spread quickly throughout the small community of Burleson. Friends and neighbors who had followed the Beam family's struggle couldn't hide their amazement. At church, Annabelle's story became a powerful testimony of faith and hope. Christy, however, still had moments of hesitation. While she was grateful for the miracle in her daughter's life, she wondered how to share the experience without it sounding unbelievable. "Kevin, people are going to think we're making this up," she said one evening. "It doesn't matter what others think, Christy. The truth is the truth. And if this story can help someone, then it's worth telling." During a special service at church, Annabelle was invited to share her experience. She stepped up to the pulpit with the courage of someone far beyond her 9 years. "I was really scared when I fell from that tree, but Jesus caught me. He showed me heaven and told me my mission here wasn't finished yet." The congregation was silent, hanging on every word. Annabelle finished with a radiant smile. "He healed me because he still has something he wants me to do. And I know he'll take care of all of you, too." Her words brought tears to many eyes. It was as though her renewed faith was a balm for others facing their own struggles. A few days later, Christy and Kevin received an unexpected call from Dr. Thompson, the specialist who had first diagnosed Annabelle. "I've been reviewing her old and new test results. I can't find any medical explanation for her recovery. Whatever happened here is beyond science." Christy hung up the phone, feeling the weight of his statement. For the first time, she realized she didn't need a logical explanation for what had happened. The miracle was real, and that was enough. The family began sharing their story at small prayer groups and community gatherings. Christy, who once felt powerless, now spoke with confidence about God's love and the importance of faith, even in the darkest times. At one of these gatherings, a woman named Clara approached Christy with tears in her eyes. "I lost my son to cancer last year. Your story brought a peace I haven't felt in so long." Christy hugged Clara, understanding that Annabelle's miracle wasn't just about physical healing. It was a reminder that God was present, even in the hardest moments. One quiet evening, as Christy watched Annabelle playing with her sisters in the backyard, a deep sense of peace settled over her heart. For the first time in months, her prayers weren't filled with questions or desperate pleas. "Thank you, Lord. Not just for the healing, but for showing me that your presence never left us." Annabelle's story began to reach far beyond the small community of Burleson. News of her miraculous recovery caught the attention of local journalists, and soon, a news crew was at the Beam family's doorstep. Christy hesitated before agreeing to share their story publicly. She knew there would be judgment, skepticism, and people who wouldn't believe what Annabelle had experienced. But Kevin reminded her of something essential. "Christy, this miracle isn't just for us. It's for everyone who needs hope." The family was interviewed by a local television program. Annabelle, seated between her parents, spoke with the same serenity and confidence she had shown at church. "I know I was healed by Jesus. He told me he has a purpose for my life, and I want to help others believe that too." Christy and Kevin shared the challenges they had faced, their doubts, and how the miracle had transformed their lives. "There were moments when I completely lost my faith," Christy admitted, tears welling in her eyes. "But God never gave up on me, even when I doubted." The interview sparked an immediate reaction. People from different places reached out, sharing their own struggles and asking for prayers. A few weeks later, Annabelle asked to visit other children in the hospital where she had been treated. "I want to tell them that God is taking care of them, even if they can't see it right now." Christy and Kevin agreed, deeply moved by their daughter's request. At the hospital, Annabelle walked the hallways with a smile that seemed to light up every room. She held each child's hand and spoke with a sweetness that felt heaven-sent. One mother, visibly moved, told Christy, "Your daughter is an angel. It's like she brings a peace I've never felt before." Annabelle's story continued to spread through social media, newspapers, and even religious circles outside Texas. The family was invited to speak at conferences and churches, where their testimony touched hundreds of hearts. Christy, who once felt unsure of herself, now spoke with a conviction born from her journey of rediscovering her faith. The miracle wasn't just Annabelle's healing. It was also the healing of my soul, which had been lost in fear and doubt. At a community event, a young woman named Emily approached Annabelle. She wore a scarf on her head, a visible sign of her battle with cancer. "I was ready to give up, Annabelle. But your story made me believe that God still has a plan for me." Annabelle held Emily's hands and, with her characteristic simplicity, said, "Never give up. God is with you, even when it feels like He's not." For the first time in months, Emily smiled, and everyone around felt they were witnessing something divine. Back at the farm, the Beam family gathered around the table after another day filled with stories and testimonies. Kevin suggested a prayer of thanks, and Annabelle led it. "Thank you, God, for using our story to help others. Please keep showing us how we can do your will." As they prayed, a golden sunset bathed the fields in light, a visible reminder of God's presence in their lives. The soft sound of the church piano echoed through the candlelit sanctuary, creating an atmosphere of reverence. Christy and Kevin sat in the front pew, watching Annabelle sing with the children's choir, her smile radiating pure joy. For the first time in months, Christy felt a genuine connection with God. "I never thought I'd be here, feeling this again," she murmured to Kevin. "That's grace, Christy. It's God showing us that we were never alone," he replied, holding her hand. The past weeks had been intense, with Annabelle's story touching lives across the country. Yet for Christy, the greatest miracle wasn't just her daughter's healing but the profound transformation happening within her own heart. After the service, the pastor approached the family. "I can see how God has restored your faith, Christy. What have you learned from this journey?" Christy paused, searching for the right words. "I've learned that faith isn't the absence of doubt, Pastor. It's trusting God even when you don't have all the answers." Christy and Kevin decided to use their experience to support other families facing similar challenges. They began organizing weekly gatherings at the church to share their story and pray with those going through difficult times. At one meeting, a woman named Helena, the mother of a terminally ill boy, opened up. "I want to believe, but it's so hard when you watch your child suffer every single day." Christy's heart ached as she took Helena's hand. "I know exactly how you feel. There were times I couldn't even bring myself to pray. But God is patient. He waits for us, even when we're lost in despair." The gatherings quickly grew, drawing families from neighboring towns. The community that had once supported the Beams now united in a greater purpose, bringing hope to those in need. Kevin began organizing donations to cover medical expenses for struggling families. "We're not just witnesses to a miracle," he said during one meeting. "We're called to be God's hands in the lives of others." On a special day, the Beam family gathered around the tree where Annabelle had fallen. Kevin had built a small bench nearby, turning the spot into a space for prayer and reflection. Annabelle held a notebook where she wrote prayers and thoughts about her experience in heaven. "Mama, I think Jesus gave me this experience so I could remind people that he's close, even when they can't see him." Christy embraced her daughter, feeling a peace that words couldn't describe. That evening, while talking with Kevin, Christy shared a growing desire in her heart. "I want to write about our story. Not for us, but for all the people who need to be reminded that God is real and that he still works miracles." Kevin nodded, a gentle smile on his face. "We'll do it together." And so, under the starlit sky above their farm, the Beam family began to realize that their journey of faith was only just beginning. Months had passed since Christy and Kevin decided to share the Beam family's story with the world. Christy poured herself into writing about Annabelle's journey, revisiting each moment of pain and triumph with the goal of sharing not just the miracle, but the hope it brought. The book, titled Miracles from Heaven, quickly gained attention, reaching readers across the country. Messages of gratitude began pouring in from people who had lost their faith but found renewal after reading Annabelle's story. "God is using our story in ways I never imagined," Christy said emotionally as she read a letter from a mother who had decided to keep fighting for her son's life after reading the book. Annabelle, now older and full of energy, was thrilled to hear how her experience was helping others. "Mama, do you think Jesus is smiling right now?" she asked one evening. Christy stroked her daughter's hair and replied confidently, "I'm sure he is." The Beam family's farm became a gathering place for those seeking comfort and inspiration. People traveled from far and wide to meet the family and hear Annabelle's testimony in person. Kevin organized small prayer events in the fields, and Christy led Bible study groups, sharing the lessons she had learned during their darkest days. "We didn't just experience a miracle," Christy said at one gathering. "We were called to be instruments of God, to bring hope and love where there is pain." Annabelle, with her unshakable faith, began speaking at religious events and community gatherings. Her simplicity and sincerity resonated deeply with everyone she met. At one event, a shy child approached her and asked, "Do you think Jesus sees me too?" Annabelle knelt to meet the child's eyes and smiled warmly. "He sees you all the time. He loves you so much that he never takes his eyes off you." The Beam family, once overwhelmed by doubt and suffering, now lived with a clear purpose. They knew Annabelle's miracle was just the beginning of something greater. Kevin summed it up simply during a conversation with Christy. "We're not perfect, but God used our imperfection to show his glory." On Annabelle's birthday, the family hosted a grand celebration in the fields surrounding the tree that had changed their lives. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers inspired by their story traveled to be part of the special day. At the end of the party, Annabelle asked to pray with everyone. She thanked God for her healing, her family, and the purpose she now understood so clearly. Thank you, Jesus, for never giving up on us. Please help others feel the same love we've felt. As she prayed, the night sky seemed to shine with even brighter stars, as if offering a visible sign of God's presence. Back on the porch, as the family gazed at the starlit sky, Christy reflected on everything they had been through. I don't think I'll ever see life the same way again, she said with a peaceful smile. Kevin nodded. That's because now we know God is in everything, even in the moments we can't feel Him. Annabelle, nestled in her mother's arms, looked up at the stars and said with the serenity of someone who had been close to heaven, He's always been here, Mama. And so, with a renewed faith deeply rooted in their lives, the Beam family moved forward, knowing Annabelle's miracle would remain a light that would never fade. If this story touched your heart as it did mine, please share how Annabelle's miracle impacted you. Leave a comment with your own story of faith, and don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications for more inspiring stories. This is the Narratives That Embrace channel. Stay blessed, and we'll see you in the next story.